Good morning. Welcome to the final event of Phoenix Sustainable Textile Systems project. Our theme today is Kestävyysloikka nyt, Sustainability Leap Now. We ask how to make and take benefit from the systems change of textiles and fashion. Phoenix is a 6-year research project which is funded by the Strategic Research Council, and we are now in the end of that 6 years. And in this event, us Phoenixers and some of our key stakeholders will share with you parts of the key learnings from these 6 years on how to co-create sustainable textile systems. I'm Minna Halme. I'm leader of the Phoenix project, and here is Sini Suomalainen, who is our interaction coordinator. We will be your guides today.
Welcome from my side as well. Let's go to the program. And as you see here, we have a little exhibition. That's our cooperation with Kiertokollektiivi. We've been working with them for a year now. And I and Sveta will be there at the exhibition sites explaining a little bit what has been going on. So you are welcome to visit these during the breaks.
Okay, let's indeed move on. So what is Phoenix? We are 9 different universities and research institutions and an interaction coordinator. From Aalto, we are the business school, design research, and material chemists. We have the Finnish Environment Institute involved, VTT, as well as LUT University and 2 universities of applied science from Lahti and from Turku. And also Eureka, the Science Exhibition Center, has been working as part of the consortium. Over the 6 years, we've had a lot of stakeholder collaborators. You see logos of some of them, the most original ones. Over there, it's been businesses, but it has also been the public sector, for instance, the Ministry of the Environment, with whom we've worked in the Green Deal agreement development on the Finnish side. And it's been also civil society organizations. Sini already mentioned one, but we've organized, for instance, a repair challenge nationwide with Martat and so on. So there's been a lot going on. And we've had international research partners as well. So that's one side of it. And then if we look at which disciplines specifically have been in the project, business studies, design research, material science, digital technologies from different sides, environmental studies, sustainability science, and law. So you can see that it's really been a lot of different kinds of scientific expertise involved. And I'm very, very happy to say that we haven't been just working parallel, but we have actually been working together. So I would like to really thank and applaud to our researchers. So this is really us, the Phoenixers. And could you, who are from the project at this point here from Phoenix, please wave a little bit. So these are really, really great people, and I will dearly miss you and this project once it's over. So let's move on.
Yes, so as a first speaker, we will have Minna Halme, who is Professor of Sustainable Business here at Aalto University Business School. And she's been leading us for these years, so thank you, Minna, for everything. And I also want to mention, as I am the interaction coordinator, that Minna has been awarded for impact of research. So that's her specialty. So we actually make a difference here.
Okay.
Welcome, Minna.
Thank you very much, Sini. So I didn't exactly want to place myself as the first speaker, but I'm doing it because this is a project about systems change towards sustainability. And I'm going to walk you towards what could be a sufficiency-based circular textile system. And in addition to that, I'm also going to look a little bit more carefully one part of it, which are sustainable business models for circularity and sustainability in the textile side. And maybe I just tell the story of now. We thought that we want to emphasize the now in this final event. And that is because often when we speak about sustainability, we speak about futures. And we thought that it's really, really so late that we must say that all of this should happen now. So what would a sustainable textile system look like? Not like this. This is the starting point unsustainable textile system, which is what we started out with. And we wanted to address the systemic problems of textile sector and textile fashion. These would be things like the climate emissions, water use in water scarce areas, water emissions, microplastic, plastics production in cheap labor countries, which often come with human rights violations, various problems relating to pesticides and chemicals in cotton farming, or microplastics if we think of the synthetic fibers. And then very, very fast cycles of using textiles. And in different ways, these problems connect with one another. So you can try to work with one of them, and many of us do. But often it's so that unless changes happen in many parts of the system will reject the new individual solutions. So we thought that let's try to work with all of these issues in our project. So what should be the goal then? What should be the goal not only of textile sector, not only of fashion, but in general, in our production and consumption lives? It should be minimizing the natural resources input that we take into the production and consumption systems, and minimizing waste that we release to the nature from these systems. And what this means then is that we should make maximum use out of the materials that we take into these systems. And the way we can do it is to have maximal value retention of materials and products over their lifetimes. So that's kind of the sort of the big goal that we've had in mind. The reality is, of course, very two-sided at the moment. If we think of the positive side, there is the European textile strategy and legislation that is pushing us to the right directions. There are also some of these little signs of interesting things, like sales of new luxury fashion declining and sales of used luxury fashion growing, which is piece of news from last year. Then there are also negative developments, maybe led by the ultra-fast fashion like China and Temu. Still a lot of textiles, used textiles are being landfilled. Very little is being upcycled, and part of garments we use are, we don't use, but we buy and we don't even use before they get destroyed. So those things are happening, and I'm just showing, these lists could be, of course, miles long, but I'm just showing this to stress the point that there are different kinds of developments going on at the moment, not only the sustainability developments. So now, moving on toward what would the new system look like, let us start with one thing that is at the core of it, and that is the circular economy, which has several different forms. of making it become true. And one of the important questions to ask is all circularity equally good from the perspective of the nature? And the answer is that no, not really. The forms of circularity differ in terms of their capacity to retain the value of the material. At the upper parts of this circular economy hierarchy, the ecological load in terms of water, energy, and chemicals is on average lesser than at the lower parts like recycling and incineration. I'm showing this because very often we think that circularity is just recycling, but it's really many forms. If we think of the financial value, then a comment that I often get is, because I also speak very much to business audiences, is like, you can't have business at the refuse and reduce sides, and resell. And then I say that, let's look at it. But what is true is that the financial value really depends on what kinds of business models you are able to develop around these different forms of circularity. So we'll now take a few examples. Even for the reduce part, there are business models. I haven't yet found good refuse business models, so I think that's kind of, for the consumers, refusing of buying a new product, using longer what you have. But on-demand business models like that of the Helsinki-Paris Anna Ruohonen brand would be an example of a business model where you have a selection of garment models, but you order it, it's not made before you order it, and you get it according to your measures. You also get to choose the fabric. So for instance, this one is of Anna Ruohonen, and they tend to be long-lasting. Then there are increasing numbers of sharing and sequential use business models, like the Dutch mud jeans, leasing jeans for a month, or for 2 or for 3 or 4 months, or you could even buy them eventually. But here the incentive for the firm is to make the jeans long-lasting. And then in the end of their lifetime, they get recycled. There are also interesting modern second-hand business models that I'd like to call them. And these are really a variety. So there are brands that are having second cycle sales of their own garments, and in this way they get the financial value from their used garments as well. Marimekko Pre-Loved would be an example. Also Alba does this. I'm taking Finnish examples here because I think that they should be better known than they perhaps are beyond our country at the moment. Then there are brands like Emme, which is having a virtual marketplace for other good quality brands clothing. There is Relove, which has a store even at the airport. To my knowledge, it's the only second-hand store at an airport. If you know of more or elsewhere, then let me know of those. Then there are also those less visible business models for fleet management for the second cycles of brands, like Niinimäki is an example. So they have a digital solution and a logistics management solution for instance, for serving brands like Marimekko and others. In the repair side, there are interesting experiments taking place, and the interesting experiments are such that the consumer can just mail their garment that they want to have repaired to the firm, who is working together with a network of sewers. the consumer gets the repaired garment back, and it's as easy as you would buy the new one. Regarding the remanufacturing, the iconic Patagonia, who also operates in those upper parts of circular economy hierarchy, they are having their worn wear collection where they make new garments out of garments that have worn out to an extent. So let's say making vests out of jackets would be an example, or making bags out of parts of worn garments. So in the future, we could see much more of this if the incentives get correct. And now we are living these very, I don't know, changing times, disturbing times, odd times, and this is where the silver lining of these times for circular economy is there, and that relates to security, and especially security of supply, because geopolitical uncertainty that grows with war and hostility, with environmental catastrophes, with these customs duty bizarreries that we have going on. All of those put our global supply chains at risk. And this is a concern for Europe particularly, because we don't have manufacturing of our own, and we also don't have that much raw material production of our own. This is not only concerning textiles, this is a more general point, but it's including textiles. So there is an opportunity for circular business, for reusing, reselling, repairing, defurbishing, to help keeping the materials and products longer in our consumption cycles. And these kinds of models will lessen the dependency of constant supply of new materials and new products from distant and increasingly precarious sources. This is also prominent for Europe because we have innovation capabilities, we have digital technologies capabilities, we have various types of material technology capabilities for developing new logistics solutions. And those kinds of solutions don't require as heavy investments as investments in factories would. And now, finally, the topic of my actual presentation title. So the goal, what should it be? We think it should be sufficiency-based circular textile system. Sufficiency pointing especially towards how we consume garments and textiles in general, and circularity referring especially to production and to business. What would it consist of? I've already alluded a bit to the business models. If we think of design, we should design for longer garment use times, for longevity and circularity, in order to make those reuse, refurbish, resell, and so on business models possible. That also would require that there are new technologies for tracking and tracing and fiber recognition, as well as for converting materials into new recycled materials. So in other words, we need technological innovations in this system. We also need new policies, new legislation that is putting the right prices to pollution and to natural resources in order to help this side, the design and technologies and businesses that are sustainable to thrive. If that happens, we would also be able to make it easy enough for consumers to lead more sustainable more sustainable, say, consumption lives, the choose according to the sufficiency principle, which at the moment is far too difficult. You have to make a lot of extra effort in order to consume with the sufficiency principle. And this would also, all of this would enhance more ethical jobs in the especially in the global south, but it would also actually increase jobs in Europe for people involved in these different models. And all of these should make it possible to minimize pollution and waste and minimize the use of natural resources. So that's kind of the big system picture that I wanted to allude to. And then the many speakers during today will deep dive into different parts of this system during today. So next after me, speaking of design for longevity and circularity and the new role of design will be Professors Dilys Williams and Kirsi Niinimäki. They come from different sides to this design question. Then thereafter, Michael Hummel from the Phoenix team, professor from our chemical engineering and material scientist, will speak about the recycled cellulosic fibers in the upcoming textile system. Then Susanna Horn from Finnish Environment Institute will discuss about the role of life cycle assessments in the textile circularity systems, the uncertainties and how to best make use of LCA data and information in building better systems. Then we will have a very important speaker, Tulin Dzhengiz, assistant professor from Manchester University Business School, who will allude to us how informal sector recycling looks like in the global south. She's been doing a lot of empirical data gathering, especially in Turkey, for this purpose. And I bet that in Tulin's presentation there is something new for each and every one of you, because we know so little about the informal sector and how recycling happens there and how that connects or does not properly connect with the certifications and regulations with which we try to steer circularity from the, say, Western or European side. And this is really important because the textile systems are so global that they don't happen in one place only. After that, we will actually have a lunch break, but that was kind of the academic morning part. And there will be then after lunch the more practice-oriented afternoon. And that is what we start with Rafaela Garluccio from Reverse Resources. And she will actually tell about what Reverse Resources, which is an Estonian-based company, but operating with recycling in Pakistan and Bangladesh. How do they do it? How to build global circular systems in practice, connecting Europe and Asia. Then we changed the language into Finnish, and Timo Huhtamäki from EMMY and Niina Elomaa from S Group will come and tell us about how to collaborate across sectors in order to make sustainable consumption of textiles, of garments, more easy for consumers. So they will tell about this, tell you about these circular floors of department stores of S Group and how to develop those kinds of, say, business ecosystems and combined business models. Then we will have Jari Toivonen from a small company called Vilikkala speaking about something that sounds quite intriguing, which is like market disturbers of circular economy. So let's see what that all tells about doing business with textile circularity. And our final speech will be by Sirpa Pietikäinen, who is a member of Parliament, has been deeply involved with sustainable textile strategy development and is involved with the development of the subsequent regulation. And she will tell about the newest regulations and how they are going to influence this sustainability leap. And in the very end of the day, there will be a panel consisting of some of the speakers of the day. And I should actually say that Sini mentioned, she showed you the Presemo link. So please keep sending questions to Presemo, and we will have one panel in the end of this morning, and then we will have another panel in the end of the afternoon. And there will be also two commentators of two speeches of the afternoon. One will be Ika Hahn from our group, commenting Rafaela's talk, and then Hanna Salmenperä from Finnish Environment Institute will be asking questions, commenting Sirpa Pietikäinen's talk. And I think that this is more or less what I wanted to share with you now. And if you burn with questions, remember Presemo. But now it's my super great opportunity to welcome our keynote speaker, Professor Dilys Williams, to the stage. Dilys is founder and director of the Centre of Sustainable Fashion at London College of Fashion, and she explores fashion as sustainability in action with researchers and businesses around the world. And she's also leader of a social purpose advisory group of her university, which is trying to reformulate universities so that they would better be able to provide solutions for the problems of our times. So Dilys, warm welcome. Here you are.
Thank you very much indeed, Minna. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
No, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. I feel very honoured. This is an incredible project. I've been reading some of the papers, although there are so many of them that I feel as if I need to take a week off to be able to do so. Yeah, I feel a great privilege being here. I'm very fortunate to be able to come here. Thank you to Minna, to Simi, and also to Kirsi. We have a long established relationship between Aalto and University of the Arts in London. We first met when we had an Erasmus exchange project, probably 15 years ago now. So yes, it does feel very special to be back here again. And I really want to spend some time this morning, maybe as a bit of a provocation in relation to what Minna's just been talking about, this 6-year program, which is a really vital program for people like myself as a designer and all of the students and the designers who I work with, who really seek to be able to feel as if they're working for an industry that they can be proud of, that they can stand up and feel as if they are making a good contribution to. You know, the definition of design is to improve something, to take something from one state and to transform it into another. And yet, as designers, we've been finding over the last few years, the more that we know about what the impacts of our design practices are, the more we become concerned. So, yes, I want to talk a little bit about how we as designers can actually expand our role beyond looking at the products and services of fashion, to really think about how we can influence wider systems at stake. And when I say this, it's because we've been working for a long time around thinking about systems design. Donella Meadows looked at the different interventions in the system, and as designers, we do want to provoke change. So we've been working for over 10 years now with a major luxury brand, luxury house, house of houses, Kering, who have Gucci, Balenciaga, Saint Laurent, etc., etc. And we've been working around this idea of how do we as designers make a positive impact. And we think about what that means in terms of not only provoking change in the products and materials themselves, but in how people perceive fashion. And through our work, we have three main aims. We're looking at how we change curriculum, as Minna said. We have this small ambition to be able to change the practices of education so that they in themselves contribute to a well-being economy. We look at what the kind of research disciplines and interdisciplinary approaches we need to take in order for us to be able to live well together in a more than human world. And this is the biggest design challenge for any designer, to not just think about the products, but also think about what the products do. We, as fashion designers, we want to do something that makes people feel good, but actually, how do we learn to live well together in a more than human world as designers? It means that we are not just expanding what we do, but also who we work with. And we also work very much with businesses. I come from a business background, and we work with micro, small, and very large companies as well, because we feel as if this has to be a co-learning opportunity. And this cooperative inquiry approach that we take to our research practice means that all of us see ourselves as researchers. We've all got something to learn, and we also see ourselves as the subjects of research. So all of our programs take this kind of co-inquiry approach. So I did want to think about, in relation to the work that you've been doing, a lot of us spend a lot of time actually being quite anxious about this work, and it's complex, and the complex adaptive systems that we are part of are something that we are grappling with. And as Minna said, looking at the issues at stake can be quite overwhelming. But what we have found has been useful is to think about not how we respond to climate, biodiversity, social inequality crises, but how these crises change us. How do we change as designers, as biologists, as lawyers, as business owners? And I was very lucky recently to be invited to speak at the More Than Human Festival that was convened by New York Law School. And Merlin Sheldrake, who's written an amazing book about mushrooms, about fungi, said, when learning about fungi, people need to be careful not to anthropomorphize them, not to think about them in human terms. It's not about us learning about what fungi might need to be able to be healthy. It's not about trying to understand life that appears so different from ours, or to reduce nature to reversions of ourselves, but rather to become more fungi, to make ourselves in our practices more like networked, soil adaptive, attentive to the signals of life. So this for us has been actually quite revolutionary, to be able to see ourselves beyond the human, to be able to recognize that feeling in other species might be quite different from feeling as humans, that there are other ways of knowing. And this also takes us to expanding our view beyond academic journals, beyond the knowledge that sits in academia, and to work with people who really understand elements of the earth and the more than human and how it can speak and how it speaks to us. So where does that take us? How can we imagine a time when humans become more fungi, more networked, more attentive to the world around us? Well, actually, the climate crisis, as we know, is a cultural crisis. It is a crisis of how we feel about ourselves and each other. So we put ourselves to work to reimagine not just what we might wear, but how we might think about well-being in more than human terms. So I want to talk a little bit about one project that we've been doing, but I'm very aware of the fact that this project, this 6-year project, has so many important and interesting things that I hope also to be able to spend some time in conversation with you all. But this question about how we might put ourselves to work has taken us from working on products and systems and services to thinking about the goals of the system. So I sat down with Marie-Claire Deveau, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Kering, and we can have quite frank and open and honest conversations with each other because we've built a relationship of trust. And we've also worked for a long time with researchers at Middlesex University who are part of the Centre for the Understanding of Sustainable Prosperity, which is headed up by Tim Jackson. And together we really came up with this idea, this question about how might we design the governance of the fashion systems that we're working in? How can we stop hitting these ceilings and walls that we're getting to in relation to the goals and rules of fashion business? So we got together and first of all did a massive literature review on what is happening in the governance of fashion. And the answer is that much of the sector is floundering. Those who are making decisions don't know what good looks like. They are really not able to think beyond the binary of financial growth for very clear reasons. You know, we can't ignore the capital that is involved in the fashion sector, and a lot of people are very put under a lot of pressure around their quarterly returns. So how do we think about change with them? They know they must change. There's a huge number of new roles in fashion companies around sustainability, new roles on business on boards. Even a couple of companies have nature on their boards, but there's a real lack of understanding around the knowledge, skills and capabilities required to make decisions about well-being. And when we talk about well-being, at the Centre we've developed a framework that we use for all of our projects that looks at cultural, social, economic, as well as environmental well-being. And that is how we term all of our projects. So we recognize that it's about a relationship problem. And how do we, as people who are working across the value system of fashion, connect with the people who are sitting on boards who have very different agendas at play? So the project proposes, it develops and it tests this idea of multi-voiceness. We draw on principles, ecological principles, principles around multiplicity, Escobar's idea of the pluriverse, for example, to think about how we have multi-voicedness in governance. We've got together with people from lots of different companies. We've done an extensive interview process to find out what people who are working on boards currently feel. And the fundamental question of what good looks like varies significantly according to how people report, who they report to, who are the leaders of these businesses. However, one of the myths that we managed to bust was that actually there's a recognition that nobody is in charge, that nature and the changes in nature are helping organizations to realize that they need to know more and they need to understand more. And yet they are stuck. And stuckness is a killer for ingenuity, a killer for imagination. So how do we actually bring people together to become unstuck through thinking creatively? Now, there's a huge contradiction between well-being and wealth, between the financial and the more than financial economy. But bipolar opposites sometimes can feel as if it's mutually exclusive and there's no way of being able to pull through. But on the other hand, these seemingly contradictory forces, when they can be brought together, can lead to innovation. This idea of creative friction. When carefully and respectfully co-created, we can do what we could not otherwise have created. So that's what we've been working on. And we have evolved with all of the participants ideas around moving from governance to stewardship. We've had an incredible response. We actually did a public call out for people who are working across the value chain, for people who think about more than human ideas from different disciplines. And we had, in a very short time, over 300 people who proposed ideas to be part of the project. And so what we've done is we've used the very simple design wheel. I don't know what, oh gosh, my goodness, I do need to hurry up. Okay, so I'm going to move on from this. What we've done is we've grounded all of our work, obviously, in science-based understandings of governance. And we were actually, during the process of the literature review, came across a recent paper that Rockström and his group have written, obviously very well known for the planetary boundaries work, but we found a paper that really spoke to what we'd been talking about. And this paper talks about the need for interspecies, intergenerational and intragenerational justice to be as necessary for us to be able to live well within planetary boundaries. Basically, it's an understanding that unless we take a multi-species approach, unless we take an intergenerational approach and a cross-location approach, we will never be able to live well together. So this was a very useful moment for us in working with big businesses, so we could make very clear our ideas and the position we were in. So. Actually, my time isn't so bad. It's going down, not up. Fabulous. Okay, I'm okay. So what we've done is we have got together to create this trusted environment with people from on boards and businesses, and got together with people who work across the value chain, from people who are soil experts through to people who really understand citizen behavior. And it's a very challenging project for lots of different reasons. One of the main reasons being that we have to work digitally. We have to work remotely because people are across the world in lots of different roles in lots of different places. So this in itself, when we're looking at a co-inquiry, is one of the massive challenges we have. And I'm really interested to hear from other people how they manage some of those challenges in developing trusted relationships. Over 6 years, I'm sure you've developed some very trusted relationships, some face-to-face, some maybe remotely as well. But one of the things that we have developed through this initial dialogue in getting together, and we're only 9 months into the project and it's a 3-year project, is this idea of the interdependencies between things and the mutuality between us. And when we think about an intergenerational, and multi-species world, we start to recognize that we are all interdependent with each other. And that, from a business perspective, has been a massive revelation. That I am because you are, if we take the Ubuntu definition of why we are here. But this notion of recognition that nobody is in charge, the recognition that we are interdependent and that we can learn from each other, and this co-learning methodology has been really revelationary to the businesses that we are working with. And so what we've got now is 3 main groups: a constellation of an advisory group, a stewardship group, who are the people who have responded to the public call, and a research group, an interdisciplinary research group. And all 3 are learning from each other and with each other and across the different groups. So leveraging change in the goals and rules of the fashion governance through this approach means that we are looking at not only the processes and practices of governance, but actually it's a knowledge, skills and capabilities focused study. So ultimately, we're not going to come up with a model that is for a business to be able to adopt as a blueprint, because this is not something that any one group of designers could do. But what we can do is we can identify the gaps in knowledge, skills and capabilities on a board. And that's what we're currently working on. So using design practice and taking ourselves right out of our comfort zones to design the governance of a business is proving to be really fascinating. The first stage of the design wheel that we use in all of our work, whether we're designing a material, a product, a service, or now a system of governance, is to start with empathy. And what we've done is we have convened 2 sets of empathic processes. One is looking at the process of understanding across the products in a luxury supply chain, because of Kering being a luxury business. Although this work is not for Kering, it's sponsored by Kering, but they want all of it to be open source so that it's for the sector rather than for themselves. But what we've done is we've also empathized across the board. So we've put together people who are soil experts, people who are goat herders, etc., with people who are CFOs, COOs, the chief operating officer in businesses, to understand each other's perspectives, the pushes and the pulls, the tensions, and the ways in which visions and values, capabilities and practices can co-emerge, and the creative friction between people in those different roles. So that in itself is demonstrating that there is a role for designers that is beyond the creation of garments. This idea of being able to work with businesses and with boards in this way is something that we had not previously thought that was possible. So this empathy phase has proved very, very important. But obviously, as with any design process, you need to define what it is that you are focusing on. So we have used this notion of stewardship almost as the product idea. How do you create this this just transition from governance in its current form through to the ideas of stewardship? And we have gathered from lots of different people their ideas of what stewardship is. From an academic perspective, stewardship is something that is in the making. It's always in flux. It's partially and potentially an apt and conceptual framing for a networked world. It's where resources and information can be widely distributed. It debunks the mythical element of power, of the idea that somebody is in charge, because it recognizes that we are ever moving in ecological cycles. And this loosening of control, this recognition that actually we are mutual, that we are interdependent, offers people a slight letting go of some of the anxiety that they have, some of the tensions at play. And it also shows that stewardship is the extent to which an individual willingly subjugates his or her personal interests, or maybe even that what they thought were their professional interests, in the act of the protection of others' long-term welfare. This actually is in the terms of reference of lots of different businesses. It's about the welfare of a business. And this suggests caring. It suggests caring for something on behalf of another. And that's actually what a board member is there to do. So stewardship as a thing in the making, we're talking about systems as emergent, paradoxical processes, not static conditions. And this then means that the tensions are dealt with dialogically. They're dealt with over time through discourse, through developing relationship. We're aware that there's many, many different ways in which this project has flaws. It is being performed in a dominant language, which is English, as it's based in the UK. We are very aware of the fact that not only from a literature and language perspective, but also from a cultural, behavioural, ways of living, ways of working perspective, we have lots of constraints and lots of limitations. So I come here not with an idea of what might be, but what might be becoming to be a way in which designers can think beyond and as well as in the material and product processes of fashion. And this idea of thinking about how we tell our stories as designers, how we interact, the practices of designing. Donna Haraway's work, who some of you may be familiar with, which actually, Staying with the Trouble, the title of one of her books, is this idea of how designers need to develop the capacity to be able to live in tension, to sit with these intentions, and to be able to empathize and connect things, not just materials, but connect relationships and ways of working. So I'll let you read what Donna Haraway says about how we use stories and how it matters, how carefully and attentively we think about how we engage in practices of design. So once we've empathized, defined, we then need to ideate and think about what ideas we really can come up with and to be able to prototype what that might look like. So we're still in that process at the moment. We are with the group of people in their first year out of 3 years of prototyping and role-playing what it might look like if you take an interspecies, multi-generational, intergenerational approach to the governance of a fashion business. The group of people we're working with this year, we are going to be going to the Copenhagen Fashion Summit in June. Yes, June, not long now, where we will role play some of these ideas with wider audiences, gather feedback, and then iterate for year 2 and then into year 3 as well. So this is very much a work in progress, quite different from how you guys are working, and the hopefully massive sigh of relief that you have now of all the work that you've done. And I just wanted to finish with one of the revelations that has come through, which is this idea, and actually it came also from some of the papers that we've been reading, around the myth of the individual. We are not individuals, we are interdependent with each other. And in fact, and this is builds on one of the papers that we looked at around the most prevalent form of life is parasites. And parasites actually live in habitats. They live within individuals and living beings. They also live outside of them. And this idea that there is no such thing as the individual. We are actually coexisting. And what does that mean for fashion? Fashion has for so long been predicated on this idea of individualism because you're worth it, the idea of selling more because you are an individual. So if we debunk the myth of the individual as being fundamentally flawed, does fashion collapse like a house of cards? Or does it evolve into a glorious representation of our interbeing, our interdependence? And does that mean that as designers, we can start to think about this idea of belonging and connectivity through our attire quite differently? We believe we can. We've got a long way to go, but we feel that if we are going to be working together in this way of coexistence, these are the 3 areas of our work together, and if we recognize that the notion of the individual is fundamentally flawed, maybe, just maybe, we can create governance of sufficiency. Maybe the businesses that we are working with can recognize that rather, and again, as Minna said, rather than thinking about a future and otherwise a what if, that we already have the notions at hand. We just need to develop the knowledge, skills, and capabilities to be able to remember those things, to have the right people in the room, to have multi-voiceness, and to really be able to celebrate the idea of what design in fashion might be. So I just wanted to leave you really with that question back to you of you've been working around models of sufficiency in terms of materials and processes and have got deep understanding which is needed so vitally by the industry. But the industry also now needs, from a governance perspective, to respond and to be able to develop its own sufficiency model of governance. I hope we can contribute to that. I hope that there may be something from something I've said that may be useful for the provocation of the conversations today. So thank you very much. Thank you. I wasn't sure if I needed to have questions now or later.
Thank you so much, Dilys, for this very, very creative and thought-provoking presentation. And you will have the possibility of not only to Presemo questions, but also we will discuss these questions that you write to Presemo in a half-an-hour panel before lunch. So you will have Dilys again. But now let me next welcome one of our Aalto star professors, Kirsi Niinimäki. She's a professor of sustainable fashion design. And Kirsi is now going to talk about the data and transparency needs and possibilities as we move towards circular textile systems. So designing for circularity, data, transparency, longevity, and recycling. So Kirsi, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Minna. Great to be here and nice to talk about something that links to our work in the Finnish project. So the topics are selected from this Finnish project, and we are not the only one who is working on this topic. Actually, there are several other researchers also from VTT as well as from School of Business in Aalto. So what this actually means, so currently we are living a really big change in the textile and fashion sector because we are trying to move from linear model to circular economy model, and of course a lot of things are happening concerning this change, and seems to be that, well, some are easier to implement than others. Especially it seems to be that, well, some of those circular economy models or practices we try to move to inside the linear model. So bigger changes need to happen so that we are really able to implement all those changes that is needed. And we need much more information so that we are able to make right decisions. So in that sense, data is really important. But from design perspective, really new design knowledge is needed, new design practices are needed, and a couple of things which are really in the core of this change is how to extend the lifetime of the garments, how we enable repair of the garments, for example, and how we can maximize the second-hand value. And of course, the recycling at the end of the life is super important. And as Minna already mentioned, very often we only talk about this textile waste recycling when we talk about circular economy. But of course, other changes also need to happen. So a couple of words about this data and transparency. So of course now these big changes are happening and European Commissions are really pushing this change that it has to happen. So that means that, well, we need much more information than previously in the linear economy model. Life cycle analysis will become more and more important. Of course, that has been existing already. Now we just have to extend that also in connection to circularity, meaning also the use time as well as the end-of-life stages. We have to have a data so that we are able to evaluate also those phases. Social life cycle analysis is new for us, so actually what comes also from these EU regulations that we should be able also to show the data coming from the workers' right, work conditions throughout the supply chain, and of course this is quite challenging. We don't really have a functioning tool even for this regulations yet. But of course, there are also tools that are under development, digital product passport being one of those. So hopefully in the future, we are then able to share the data and then different partners of the supply chain are then able to use the data. Because actually we don't really even know what kind of tools are developing under this digital product passport. But the idea is that then in the future, this kind of decision making would be much easier than currently. And of course, the Green Claims Directive is really important. So in the future, we cannot say that something is sustainable unless we have the scientific information as a background for our claims. So that probably will also change the business. And extended producer responsibility. So this is really important that, well, producers, importers, their responsibility goes through the clothing use time until the end of the life. So that actually means that we also have to take those account when we are designing the actual product. It's quite complicated to collect the data. Well, everyone knows that, well, the supply chains in this sector is really saturated, they are really long, so it's easier to find or get the information for the first tier, meaning that, for example, fashion brands are able to ask information from the factory where the garments are assembled, but going then onwards in the supply chain is actually quite challenging. But the idea is that in the future we will have all information from the fibers, yarns, textiles throughout the supply chain. So when we then design garments that are able to easily recycle, we need this information. What kind of fibers, chemicals, colors has been used throughout the supply chain. But there's no other side of the coin. Of course, the data collection is complicated, and somebody, of course, owns the data. How we are then able to share the data, for example. But the idea is that there will be a lot of data in the future, and of course that could be the part of the business. Somebody might make the business out of the data, so we can also take this as a positive side. And of course, we need this information so that we are really able to evaluate different fibers, different design choices, for example. So without this data, we are not really able to implement the sustainable transformation. And of course, everyone actually are really keen to also get the data from downstream actions, and of course that's quite challenging. For example, the use phase, reuse, reselling and recycling, so of course that's really valuable, but the idea is, for example, in the new EU regulations that we should define the lifetime of the garments, and of course that means that we should have some kind of information also from the use phase and how then to define the lifetime of the garments. And of course, then this all links also to longevity. Actually, in Finnish, we have been interviewing companies about their quality work, Finnish companies, and seems to be that they take this really seriously. They put a lot of resources for this quality work that they are doing. Of course, that mainly links to these technical quality aspects. But if you think about the circular economy, we also have to extend the quality understanding, because then we have to also include the use phase and the end of life stage. And we know already, especially in the chemical textile waste recycling, that in there actually the quality aspect is also, it has a relevance, that actually what kind of qualities are put in the textile chemical recycling. I hope that Michael probably will talk more about this. But we also noticed that actually companies are working a lot with the consumers and really also not only like understanding consumer preferences, but also trying to educate consumers from this quality point of view. So those are really important if you talk about longevity and how we can extend the use time of the garments. And lifetimes is actually quite complicated, so quite many times actually is said that, well, in the fast fashion sector, consumers are not really looking for the best quality anymore. That quality can be only average even or lower, because consumers are looking for the best price or the new fashion items. These kind of more trends, fashion trends are the more important aspect for consumers than quality issues. And previous studies also point out that the level of the quality it's enough that garments last for 10 washing times, which sounds really, really bad. So, and this is the work from Rinna Saramäki. So actually she made a survey asking consumers that how they see this reasonable clothing lifetimes in different product categories. And as you see the results, nobody doesn't say that, well, 10 times is enough. Actually, everyone is really expecting quite long lifetime and quite many washing times, except in the socks. But this is something like, it's like a consumer's reality. Of course, they are Finnish consumers. But then actually she also organized a workshop with the fashion brands, and the results were quite a lot the same, actually. So nobody's talking about these 10 washing times. And then, of course, it's really important that we also begin to talk about this kind of like other actions than the quality. So how to extend the lifetime. So all these kind of actions that we as a consumers, we all can somehow contribute to repairing, reusing, updating, swapping, and the second hand. But of course, in here also the companies can have a role, and they should of course have a role, much more responsibility, how they build their businesses and how these actions could be then included in the business thinking. Here is a nice example of one of our doctoral researcher, Elina Määttänen. She is actually ongoing this kind of 5 years challenge. She's originally fashion designer, but now doing academic research. And she has decided that she will buy no new garments in 5 years' time. She just actually redesigns the garments that is already in her wardrobe. And here is an example about knit, which is actually originally from wool socks. And then she also used different kind of like embroidery on this kind of decorative methods. It's not only like just like using old garments and updating, but also thinking about the aesthetics that actually she's able to create through this kind of design action. And then the recycling, and of course this is really important for us as a designers, how we then actually take all this account when we are designing the original products. So we need totally new ways of designing manufacturing textiles and garments. This information is actually still quite a lot of lacking. Quite many research are then try to contribute for this, but actually this is a big change that is currently happening. And we know already that actually this kind of identification process, when we take back the textile waste or garments, actually it's not quite easy to identify what are the fibers, what are the blends. So it's not quite easily identified. So mainly actually that happens by human people currently, but of course the idea is that this should be automated totally. So this might also limit something that, okay, what kind of fibers, what kind of textiles, what kind of blends and structures we can use in the future if you really want to design garments that are easy to recycle at the end of their life. Currently, we are very strongly focusing on this monomaterials, meaning that, okay, everything can be put in the same recycling process. But of course, that means that, well, in certain garments, we lose quite a lot of functionality if we are not then for example, making blends. And this is a little bit problematic. And we also talked that, well, if there are some materials put in the garments, so how easy that is then to disassemble at the end of the life. And that is actually quite problematic. And we try to, of course, enhance the textile to textile recycling, this closed loop aspect, so that actually textile waste then will begin to be a raw material for new high quality yarns again. So of course it's possible to place textile waste other like open loop recycling, meaning that they became composites, for example. But of course then it doesn't help the situation that we have in textiles that we should substitute polyester or cotton, for example, with these recycled materials. That, of course, is then the aim, that actually we should produce high-quality yarns from textile waste that also is, from business point of view, really reasonable. And of course, the idea is that, well, material has value even at the end of its lifetime. So if we have designed the garments so that it's easy to recycle, it might be that there's also new kind of business opportunities, even if we are talking about textile waste. And in the future, that means that we will also design much more from the material which is recycled. And that means that, well, some attributes might be totally different compared to virgin materials. We might lose some functionality aspect, and there might be some quality concerns when we are using recycled materials. But there might be also other kind of design possibilities. So might be that we are not taking away all the chemicals that are in the textile waste, or for example colors, that we can actually use them as a design element. So that actually means that, well, we have to totally then redesign our thinking, that what is our starting point for the design process, if there already exists some chemicals or some colors, for example, when we are starting the designing. And then is actually this kind of aspect that is less discussed. Of course, this is old, that we are just collecting the old garments and then redesigning based on those. Here is an example of Anna Lindström, Swedish researcher who came to us and ran a couple of days workshop. She has developed a method that actually how these old garments can be used as a raw material for new design. And that was actually quite creative way that actually still there's a lot of materials. We don't always have to just emphasize the textile waste recycling, but actually we can use the materials such, begin the design process already existing garments. All leftover materials, and the idea is, of course, here is that, well, we also then have to challenge our aesthetic world, that what kind of things we actually are producing. Do we only make this kind of mass manufactured aesthetic, everything looks the same, all the colors are exactly the same, or would there be possibilities to educate ourselves and educate the designers that actually we can actually be much more creative from this aesthetic point of view. So maybe there should be much more variation at the end result if you are taking this creative approach. And here are examples from Kasia Korniak and Elina Onkinen. So actually they collected old workwear garments from Lindström, and of course they are quite high quality. And then they begin to over-dye and print and redesign a new fashion collection based on those workwears. And here is Sofia Di Nello's examples. So of course the second-hand business, we think that, well, that's one solution in here, but even there is this leftovers. For example, Emmy makes this kind of like a quality check, and then they exclude some of the garments that they are too low quality, and they also exclude if the garments has been unsold for 6 months, so actually they exclude that from the second-hand platform. So they have this kind of side streams, and actually our students last summer collected those side streams that were like leftovers or even waste, and they washed them and then begin to redesign those basically waste garments as a new garments. So that's also something that actually will challenge a little bit our aesthetic way of producing garments and of course our design practices. Thank you, that was my presentation.
So we'll start the second part of the morning session, and this will be with Professor Michael Hummel from our School of Chemical Engineering. Michael will be providing an overview of the market of cellulosic fibers and the related emerging technologies, and he will be speaking indeed about the future of the recycled cellulosic fibers in the textile system. Here you are, Michael. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Minna, for this very, very kind introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Minna gave already away what this talk will be about, so I will be looking at different textile recycling initiatives, in particular in Europe, with a focus on the chemical recycling of cellulosic fibers. But before I want to give you an overview of what I will talk about in detail, I would like to start with this picture that is probably known to most of you, a picture by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, but it's such a powerful image illustrating the linearity of the textile industry, at least from a material perspective. If you look at the left side, almost the entire material that we use for textile production is virgin, whether it's synthetic materials, cotton, or any other fiber, but we take fresh material in. And after we have used the textiles, more than 70% is landfilled or incinerated, and the small but decisive part is actually mismanaged and ends up in the environment, causing issues such as microplastics generation. And only a tiny part there on the top is looping back. And I'm deliberately saying looping and avoiding the term recycling, because what is called here cascaded recycling is essentially reuse. So we are taking all textile scraps and we use them, for instance, for insulation in building materials. And while this is a very good use because we are using the material then for something that lasts for decades, if not centuries, it's not recycling. Recycling for me means that we produce the same product with the same quality again, like we do with glass and bottles or with metal and cans. And so this true recycling, feeding back to new materials, is this tiny turquoise loop that is going back there, and that is something that I want to look at a bit closer today. But in order to do so, I would like to introduce a few ground terms, and I see some material experts here, so for those, please bear with me a couple of minutes. It's very basic, but I want to talk about wood pulp, I want to talk about what is cellulose, and about the two major production technologies, and that's the lyocell and the viscose process. Before we then talk about textile recycling, and as said, chemical recycling of cellulosic fibers, and I want to end the talk still with a few remaining, at least technical challenges that have to be overcome within the next couple of years in order to move forward. So this is the simplified textile value chain. We start with some raw material. They can be synthetic or they can be natural. And out of those, we can produce fibers, or we take natural fibers into the system like cotton. We produce yarns and garments. We dye and finish them. We produce the textile product, and then we put it on the market. And now here, I want to focus on this step here, the production of the fibers, and more specifically, use cellulosic feedstocks for fiber production. So what is that cellulosic feedstock, and what are these fiber production technologies? And the cellulosic feedstock is essentially wood. And wood is then refined or pulped in a pulping mill, and the detailed steps are not really relevant for this presentation, but it's a multi-step process. And essentially what is done there is trying to remove the other constituents in wood, which are hemicellulose and lignin. So depending on the wood source, or whether we talk about hardwood or softwood, we have something around 40% cellulose, we might have something between 15 and 30% hemicellulose and 20 to 30% lignin. And if we produce paper, we try to get rid of all the lignin. But if we want to produce fibers out of this for textile applications, we also have to reduce the hemicellulose content to 8% or lower, give or take. What we also do in a pulping process is we try to increase the brightness of the product. So here on the very right-hand side, you see how the wood chips are pulped first. They are very brown, that's the lignin, and then the lignin is removed successively so that in the end we have a white powder that we can convert into shiny fibers. So in the end, we have this cellulose product from wood that we can now use for the lyocell or viscose process. Now, very quickly, what is cellulose? Cellulose is a linear chain molecule that is called a polymer, from the Greek word poly for many and meros for parts. And essentially, they consist of a unit that repeats itself. We call it a monomer, or a repeating unit. And this repeating unit can be the same, or it can be different ones that are put together. In case of cellulose, it's the same. It's a glucose unit that is repeating itself. And these cellulose chains, they're not all the same length. Some are shorter, some are longer, so we have a chain length distribution. And it also depends where we source it from. In cotton, these chains are very long. Also in wood, they're very long. But as we pulp them and they undergo chemical modification, they are getting shorter. So this is the raw material that we use. These chains, as you can see here in this illustration, they're linked covalently together, but they also interact with each other. Now, if you want to process a polymer, you have to get it into a liquid state, and if you have a thermoplast, like polyester, you can melt it, and in a molten state, you can process it. You do this by supplying heat and reducing the interaction between these chains. For cellulose, this is not possible. If you try to do this, reduce the interaction between the cellulose chains, before you succeed, you actually break the cellulose chains apart and you degrade everything. So the only way to move forward is to find a solvent that can dissolve these molecules so you can spin them into fibers. And there are two basically ways established for this. There's the viscose process, a very old process that uses chemical modification of the cellulose. So in between, we react it with carbon disulfide, and it forms the xanthate. The xanthate can be dissolved, then is spun into fibers, and then the CS2, this carbon disulfide, is removed again. So in the end, you have a pure cellulose fiber, and there's nothing to worry about. The process has been patented in 1892. The first production was in 1904. And despite being a very complex process with many steps, over these last 120 years, each of these steps has been optimized to a very great extent. This is a very, very efficient process, and the properties of the fibers are extremely developed. Speaking of the properties of fibers, one of the reasons for the success of the viscose is it's not just for textile applications. There are a lot of other applications that you can do with the viscose process. But there is something that casts a shade on the viscose process, and that is this carbon disulfide. It's a very toxic chemical, having a lot of side effects, and can cause byproducts that contain sulfur that are equally harmful to both working forces and the environment. And for that reason, even though the viscose process has been developed in Europe, and Europe was the fortress of the viscose production, United Kingdom, Germany, but also in Finland, nowadays there are hardly any viscose mills left. There is one in Austria that operated by Lenzing, and one in Germany, a small one that is struggling at the moment and not doing so well. The viscose process is still the most popular process, and it has moved entirely to Southeast Asia, where, amongst others, environmental regulations are not that strict. The alternative to the viscose process is the lyocell process. The lyocell process does not need this chemical modification, but it has found a solvent that can dissolve cellulose directly, and this solvent can be recovered to 99.95%, so closed-loop operation process. It's a very particular solvent. Here it's N-methylmorpholine N-oxide, usually just referred to as NMMO, and has been first reported in the 1930s. The process has been developed at the end of the 1960s, 70s, and beginning of 1980s, and the first commercial plant was only established in the 1990s. So this is a technology that has been around only for a bit more than 30 years, and for the most of that time it has been in the hands of one company. So for that reason, this process is certainly not as developed as the viscose process, but as we will see, in a little while. It is now massively expanded, and it is considered as the future of, at least of those processes that are at the moment commercially available. Also, I want to show you very quickly the properties of these fibers, and what you look at now is a so-called stress-strain curve. So what we do is we take a fiber, we put it in between clamps, we stretch the fiber. So we measure how far can we stretch it before it breaks and how much force is needed for this. And on the very bottom you see the viscose fiber. Viscose fiber is the weakest of all these fibers, but it's very elastic. One downside of the viscose fiber is also that when it gets wet, it loses 50% of its strength. And especially in the early generation of viscose garments, this was an issue because when you were washing your viscose garments, what happened was the fibers got loose and the garment actually lost its shape and came out deformed. Meanwhile, that is solved by smart blending with other fibers and through textile engineering. And the viscose fiber for textile standard is still an excellent fiber. Modal, I also put there, that is a variation of the viscose fiber. It's also a viscose technology that it's based on, so it does contain carbon disulfide. And then we have cotton there, and the lyocell. Lyocell is one of the strongest fiber. And one more thing that I wanted to point out here also is how do those fibers interact with moisture. You see here cotton. Cotton has this hole in the middle, that's the lumen, so when the cotton grows, actually the nutrients are coming through there. When you harvest cotton, this is drying, collapsing, and has this hole in there. Whereas the manufactured fiber, lyocell, modal, and viscose, they do not feature this. But the moisture management is different in these fibers, so you can see here where the moisture is going, where the water is going, and in lyocell, it's evenly distributed. That does not mean it behaves like a sponge, but it means that the fiber is easily coming in and easily going out because there are a lot of microchannels in the fiber. So with having put the background, let's have a quick look at the market figures. Cotton, at the moment, around 24 million tons per year produced. Dominating fiber on the textile market is still polyester, more than 70 million tons. And now if we look at these manufactured cellulosic fibers, we have viscose with around 6 million. And lyocell with only 0.6 million tons at the moment. But now, as we speak, a lot of other companies than Lenzing is ramping up their production. And RGE, for instance, has announced a production facility of 0.5 million tons that should be commissioned this year, so that would almost double the production capacity. Okay, now looking back at this linear textile chain, how can we make this more circular? And here I want to tell a very short story. A few weeks ago I have been in the USA on a conference, and my postdoc there was giving a presentation on analysis of textile waste. So not even claiming that we do anything that we can actually recycle it, just analyzing the textile waste so we can work with the sorters and with the actual recyclers. And then a guy stands up there and starts it was about a 2-minute rant that all of this is nonsense. And he was listing all these issues that we are well aware of here that are impossible to overcome. This will never be a business. And then he just left the room before any of us could address him. And it did show in a way that while the USA indisputably is leading a lot of research fields by far, but when it comes to textile recycling, I think we in Europe are at least 10 years ahead of many other countries or continents for that matter. So I came back and I wanted to see, okay, what is the actual activities that are ongoing on textile recycling? And before I show you an overview of this, very briefly a few other terms so that we are all on the same page. Mechanical recycling means that we take a textile fabric, we shred it, we tear it into fiber pieces, we take those fibers and respin it into a yarn. Usually we have to blend in a bit of fresh cotton so that the yarn is strong enough, but this is the most invasive way. Chemical recycling means that we, in the case of cellulose, we have to redissolve the cellulose and respin it with one of the technologies. Or in synthetic polymers, we can either recycle the polymers per se, or we take the synthetic polymers, we depolymerize them to these monomers, to the building blocks, and then repolymerize it. That's the most cumbersome way, but that gives you the best product because then it's really a virgin product that you have at hand. So I wanted to look at what is going on in the world, and then I saw someone did the job already. Centexbel, a research institute in Belgium, released an excellent white paper giving an overview of different activities in the world, and I just want to give an overview of this here, a graphical representation. So mechanical recycling is here in green, so that's, like I said, shredding and defiberizing. Textile sorting in purple. We have here chemical recycling of cellulosic fibers, which we will talk about a bit more. Polymer recycling of synthetic and blended fibers, so there we do the polymer recycling, or then the monomeric recycling. This is done here. Neither the authors nor I claim that this is a comprehensive list. And if we look at something, at the problem, inevitably we do this through a biased lens. So obviously there was a more focus on the European countries, and there are certainly initiatives somewhere else in the world that are not covered here. Nonetheless, I think it is fair to say that the epicenter of textile recycling is in Europe. And so now, let me use the remaining time to quickly look at this chemical recycling of cellulosic fibers. And here are the 6 that I quickly want to address, and also to make you understand where in this field they are actually operating. Saxel, the first one, is a Dutch company, spin-off from a university. And what they do is they take textile waste, they treat it mechanically and enzymatically, and their product is something that is just like the wood pulp. So they can give this to a fiber producer, and the fiber producer is then spinning fibers out of it. In their early development, they also spun lyocell fibers themselves, but now they announced a cooperation with Birla, and they said they have now a 750 tons per year plant in planning. The second one is Circulos, former Renewcell, based in Sweden. They're doing a similar thing. They're taking textile waste, they're removing the synthetics, in foremost polyester, creating a feedstock that is just like dissolving grade pulp from wood, and that is then sold to different spinners. And they have a commercial plant of 60,000 tons per year. Södra is actually a wood pulp producer that also started to take textile waste in and convert it also into wood pulp, which kind of makes sense because they know exactly what their product must look like so that spinners can work with that. And they have a demo plant with around 6,000 tons per year, also based in Sweden. Södra is collaborating with Lenzing, and Lenzing's Refibra technology is basically a lyocell type fiber where they blend something between 20 and 30% of this textile paste pulp with wood pulp and produce then fibers that are essentially in the same quality as a standard lyocell fiber. From their sustainability report, they claim that they have a 25,000 tons per year production, which they aim to increase to 50,000 tons by 2027. Infinite Fiber Company in Finland is a bit special in that sense. Placed here in Espoo and Kemi, they are doing both. They can pre-treat the textile waste and then also spin it into new fibers, and they spin it into new fibers with a completely new technology. Their fibers, they have characterization of the viscose fiber, so they would feed into this market, but they are avoiding this toxic chemical, the main problem of the viscose process, this carbon disulfide, and using urea, a natural substance, to produce those fibers. They are also having a demo plant with 30,000 tons per year. And even though maybe insignificant with those companies, I do want to mention IonCell because it has been developed here at Aalto University. IonCell is also a fiber producer, so they are taking in textile-based pulp and wood pulp, producing lyocell-type fibers. And at the moment, there is a pilot line here in Otaniemi that can produce around 300 kilos per year. So, looking at all these activities, I think we have come a long way. It's encouraging what is going on, although still there is a long way to go. And at this point, I want to loop back a little bit to what Minna, for instance, addressed at the very beginning, that even if we have this perfect material recycling, if we don't start using our textiles more sustainably, then the textile industry will not get more sustainable. If we use our t-shirts 5 times, throw it away, and have to do this chemical recycling, it's too much of an environmental impact. And also what Kirsi mentioned earlier is that not just the lifetime, but the use time of the textiles has to get longer. And the only way that we can increase the use time again of textiles is by increasing the quality of the textiles. I want to end with this slide. I could have also showed it at the beginning. It's again some market figures, but I still want to highlight some of the challenges that are associated with textile recycling. This is some statistics from Eurotex, and they estimated that in 2020 we had approximately 6 million tons of textiles on the market, of which 2 million tons were collected and 4 million tons were not collected. Out of the collected, only 0.8 million tons were available for recycling, and the rest was resold or wholesold somewhere else. Now they did a forecast for 2030, and this available for recycling, it should increase almost double to 1.5 million tons. So that is encouraging. However, if we look at the demand for recycled fibers just within the European Union, the estimate is 3.9 million tons. And if we look at the total demand for fibers in clothing, the estimate is more than 7 million tons. So two messages to take away from here. First of all, we will still need fresh raw material to produce or to satisfy our demand for textiles. So we also have to clean up these production sites. And the second one is, and that is crucial if you are in the textile fiber recycling business, even though textile waste is omnipresent, it doesn't mean that it is in such a form that we can use it. And if you want to ramp up your production capacities, you have to make sure that there's enough raw material available. So I didn't want to end with this slide because I wanted to give a bleak outlook on this. But basically also what Professor Williams already addressed is that we cannot solve these issues if we work in silos alone, but we have to do this together as an ecosystem. And for that reason, I thought this Finnish project was really a pleasure to work in because it combined so many different actors from different sectors, and we tried to solve or at least develop solutions collectively. And as such, I think our learnings in Finnish are a blueprint that we can hopefully develop on a national and international scale. And with this, I'd like to thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Mihail, for super informative presentation. I saw a lot of photo taking on the way, and the slides will also be available later on if somebody didn't have time to take the photos on time from some of Mihail's informative slides. Now it's time to move on. As you know, product lifecycle assessments are being used for various kinds of societal decision-making purposes. Yet, what we have very well learned in Finnish, and I think that it's also a little bit more widely available, is that there is a lot to know about what kind of qualities the LCA data has. And now Susanna Horn, who is our life cycle analysis expert, will tell you about how to navigate in the jungle of LCA facts and uncertainties. Here you are.
Thank you. Thank you, Minna. So as Minna said, my name is Susanna Horn, and let's switch this slide. So this is gigantic face of mine, not visible anymore. Okay, so I work as a leading researcher and as a group manager in the Finnish Environment Institute, and I was given the task to talk about how to navigate in the jungle of LCA facts and uncertainties. And jointly with me, Helena, Hanna, and Kia, also from the Finnish Environment Institute, have prepared this presentation. I always go to the wrong. Okay, so I think many of you know what life cycle assessment, LCA, means, but for those of you who don't, there's a short recap about this method. So it's a method for assessing the environmental impacts of a product and service throughout its life cycle. So three things to remember. We are interested about the environment here. We are in the context of a product, and we cover the entire life cycle. And below you see a picture of a very straightforward life cycle of a product, starting from the raw materials extraction, going through various life cycle stages such as manufacturing, use, and then going to the end of life of the product, disposal or recycling, that is. So in LCA, we go through all of these life cycle stages one by one and try to estimate the inputs in terms of material, energy and water, and the outputs that are waste, emissions, and actually the product as well. And going through these all stages, we sum them up and then make some mathematical calculations in order to then proceed to the actual impact categories in the environment. So there are mainly 16 different categories. So it's not only the carbon footprint that is most prevalent maybe still today, but we have also other climate change impact, that is the carbon footprint, that also other environmental impacts such as water footprint, but also acidification and eutrophication and many others. So we need to actually try to estimate all of these to have a big enough picture of the entire environmental impacts. And we need to also remember that typically the environmental impacts are not calculated per product, so one garment, but we should actually estimate the environmental impacts per use. So this is analogical to the cost of driving per kilometer instead of having the environmental impact of the car. And this gives us the opportunity to also integrate the benefits of a prolonged life cycle as such. Otherwise, the additional use times would only be an additional burden. So yeah, why is life cycle a jungle? It seems quite straightforward from that picture. But, and I seem to have a similar picture as Michael had before. We do not anymore try to be in a linear economy, but in a circular one. And this makes the life cycle a little bit more complex than it used to be. So first of all, we have the backflow from the end of life to the raw material extraction, and we can have actually multiple life cycles. So we need to make a decision at what point do we actually cut the life cycle that we are interested in. Otherwise also, for example, the repair, reuse and rethink options create the backflow to the use phase back again, and remanufacture also a backflow from the use to the manufacturing phase. Repurpose means that we actually generate or bring the material to a completely other function, so it moves the product life cycle as such. But yeah, in addition to the circular economy, also individual life cycle phases present problems for the life cycle assessment. In the raw materials extraction, especially probably these bio-based raw materials are a little bit problematic. The carbon sinks are difficult to estimate. They relate to the land use of the bio-based materials, and it's been a little bit of a hot topic how we model and quantify the carbon sinks, and that further also leads to problems of estimating the biodiversity impacts, for which we don't even have an indicator yet as such. The use phase is very problematic, as Kirsi also mentioned in her presentation. As life cycle assessment covers the entire life cycle of a product, we need to make a lot of assumptions of the use phase as well. How many times a product is used for? Do we wash it at all? Do we tumble dry it? These all use energy and water, so that's why they are quite important also to include. Are we repairing it, or are we passing the garment on to the next consumer? And this technical versus emotional durability is actually very, very important in LCA. So when we calculate the environmental impacts according to the technical durability of the garment, typically manufacturers or designers do try to design it for as long durability as possible, and then we might overestimate actually the life cycle, because in garments and in fashion products, it seems that we use it for a lot less. So the emotional durability of the garment is can be quite a lot shorter. The recycling, as we heard also, requires some additional assumptions to be made in the LCA. We have some novel recycling processes, but we would like to actually include the in the LCA the process as it would be in an upscaled form, so that it would be in an industrial scale already. So often if we have novel recycling processes, we need to make upscaling assumptions for the process. Multi-materials or chemically impregnated textiles require also additional process steps in order to have a safe backflow of the material. And then, yeah, here also substitution is extremely important, because that is the thing that generates the benefits of the recycling. Otherwise, we would be just processing it for more. So we need to add the benefits, how much the recycled material is able to substitute for the virgin material. We have to be sure that somebody buys the recycled material in order to include these sort of negative emissions, substitution impacts of the material. Also, the quality of recycled fiber needs to be included as such. Well, so based on these rather challenging assumptions that we have had to make, of course, the comparison then of two different products made by two different LCA analysts might be a little bit unfair. And maybe you sort of got the impression through these issues already that the root cause to the uncertainty is the lack of data, or the lack of primary and good quality data to these. The uncertainty and accuracy of the data is for sure one problem. Here you see the uncertainty, for example, of cotton's environmental impacts. You see that this indicator that has been calculated here has been on the level of 100, but due to the uncertainty, we actually have a range between something like 20 to 175. So this presents the range of the data that we are then moving for. In effect, we would have to actually calculate the environmental impacts for this entire range and present it also accordingly. The timeliness is also important data problem. Here you see the graph showing the Finnish electricity mixes carbon emissions and how they have evolved in time. So they have reduced to something like 10% of what it used to be within the 15 years time. And electricity is a big driver for the carbon footprint especially. So we need to be sure to try to include accurate or timely data for the environmental impact, for the electricity. Data is also not always available to us. If a manufacturer is trying to do a carbon or an environmental impact calculation, they need to go back many steps in the value chain, either downstream or upstream. And the further we go in the value chain, the more difficult it is actually to get hold of real up-to-date data. Also, they don't own the data, so nobody actually is making sure that the raw material producers are really actually required to hand this data over. And finally, human or deliberate mistakes can also happen, unfortunately, in data collection. Yeah, so in short, LCAs also especially due to these data uncertainties can be uncertain and especially incomparable. And here a quick slide. I don't expect you nobody to see or read this, but it's just a very quick slide about the use of LCA in regulatory instruments as well. So here you can see some of the EU regulatory policies that have been developed and which require an LCA in some form or another. So they might focus on a specific life cycle stage. They might require certain impact categories to be calculated. They are all a little bit difficult, which makes it different, which makes it also difficult to try to be in line with them. So, yeah, we there is, in terms of EU regulations, there's a very strong LCA-related policy called the product environmental footprint, and that aims exactly to increase the comparability of these LCAs, which we are following closely. Well, having talked now half of the time about what is bad in LCA, let's switch to what is good in LCA. So even though we need to just be aware about the drawbacks that I just mentioned before when we try to make conclusions based on LCAs, LCA is still a sufficient estimate, and it's the best estimate we can make about the environmental impacts of products. We don't have, by at least at this point, any better methodology yet. So the value of LCAs doesn't come from maybe producing exact numbers as such, but it comes from understanding the hotspots, which life cycle stages are causing the most environmental impacts, for example. Also, if we have similar assumptions behind LCAs for different products, it's a very good basis for comparing products. We can also, in comparisons, we can also reveal trade-offs between different life cycle stages and between different impact categories. This means that if we change, for example, the raw material of a product, this might mean that we need to put a little bit more resources, for example, in the recycling part. So this is the trade-off between life cycle phases, and between impact categories this means that maybe we have trade-offs between water footprint and carbon footprint. Yeah, and we are also able with LCA to sort of assess the causal relationships between decisions and their consequences, just that I mentioned before with changing the raw material, for example. And roughly said, we can still with LCAs provide results with an uncertainty of at least plus or minus 10%. So that is quite close that we can get commonly. And how we can also improve the LCAs that we are carrying out, make them more impactful, is that we need to maybe consider for what purpose commonly we are doing an LCA, and then make the assumptions and collect the data accordingly, so that we always keep in mind for what purpose we are doing the LCA for. We need to have for that purpose then consistent data and consistent assumptions. And as I mentioned, the uncertainty and sensitivity can be quite high depending on where we have collected the data from. So an analysis of the uncertainties and sensitivities should be a basic requirement for any LCA. Yeah, and finally, LCA should account for the geographical differences. Especially, for example, the electricity mix is different in all parts of the world, so these kind of differences need to be included. And who can use LCA? Many different stakeholders, of course, can use LCA for different purposes. For one, the companies can improve their product designs or the materials by utilizing the results of an LCA. They can also identify hotspots both within their production processes but also along the entire value chain, select suppliers, or simply for communicating as well. And regulators can use LCAs for developing environmental regulation, either product-specific or then wider policy measures, and of course deciding on subsidies and taxes which prefer then the environmentally better products. We, as researchers, I'm not even going to read it, we can use LCA for anything practically, but consumers, I would still like to highlight that if we are able to present comparable LCA results, this will be a very powerful tool also for consumers to make purchasing decisions and then decide on how to consume the product, so how often they want to wash it and how they dispose of it. And this is my final slide. So we have used LCA in many different purposes in Phoenix project, and what we have found out on a higher level is that these different circular economy solutions that were originally also presented by Minna already, they are not by far similar in terms of their environmental impact. So we have clearly a hierarchy which is better than the other. First of all, refusing to consume offers, of course, the most environmental benefits. Refusing to consume means that the environmental impact would be zero, of course, considering then potentially rebound effects from them. But use phase decisions are seem to have a large impact on the environmental impacts. As you remember, we had this per use time, so the more use time a garment gets, the less the environmental impacts also get. And the tighter loops seem to be better reuse, repair and remanufacture than the looser loops like recycling. And we have to be in recycling, they cause considerable impacts as well, depending on how much energy and chemicals and water we feed into the recycling process. But it is this substitution, this avoiding the primary impacts that is actually the part that then generates the benefits. And even though the choice of raw material has been quite a focus in recent years in the textile sustainability discussion, the choice of raw material is only one factor that needs to be considered. And even if we made a very sustainable choice of the raw material, this would not make the product sustainable by definition. And then this growing online shopping, which means that we have a lot more transports, for example, throughout the retail part, needs to be included maybe with a little bit more scrutiny as well. If we return clothes and sell them again, this means that we always have an additional, quite a high burden added to the LCA, to the carbon footprint or environmental footprint. And finally, as a last conclusion from the LCAs in Phoenix, we have noticed that there are actually quite a lot of trade-offs between these various environmental impacts, specifically related to the water footprint, climate footprint, and toxicity impacts. In short, if we want to reduce for example, the toxicity risks related to a recycled garment, we need to use more energy and chemicals in order to take these chemicals out. So we actually increase the carbon footprint. Also, water and climate footprint are sometimes causing trade-offs between. If we want to save water, we need to pump the water back, and this also requires energy consumption. But that is all I wanted to say, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Susanna. That was really useful, and I'm pretty sure that you are going to get a few questions for the questions and answers session. And now it's time to go to our last talk of the morning session. Tulin Dzhengiz from Manchester Metropolitan University will enlighten us about something that we often don't talk about as concerns circular economy and recycling. And that is the informal sector reuse, recycling, circularity work that happens in the global south. And that is actually indeed a big part of circular economy in the world. So Tulin, here you are. The floor is yours.
Hi everyone. So thank you so much for the invitation, Minna. It's great to be back at Aalto. As Minna just said, my name is Tulin Dzhengiz. I work at Manchester Metropolitan University. I did my postdoc here at Phoenix project, and part of this presentation actually comes from the field trips that I have done while I was working in this project. So we're going to talk about what's informal circularity in the global south and how to include it in the textile systems change. I would like to start with some definitions, and it will also help me calm down a little bit if I ask you some questions. So how many of you are familiar with informal economy? Have you interacted with informal enterprises before? So hands up if you have any interaction. Okay, so quite a few hands, but I'm assuming you are putting your hands up and you are academic researchers who have explored it, so perhaps there are still many that haven't really explored it and also probably not familiar with the people. So I will try to give a bit of a human face because we talk a lot about recycling, but of course, the recyclers have their faces and voices as well that we need to understand, and particularly from Global South contexts too. So informal circularity is defined by the International Labour Organization as economic activities outside formal economic and labour arrangements. And often we see informal economy thriving in this unemployment environment where we also see a lot of precarious work. And actually, in many parts of the world, informal economy appears rather as the norm, rather than the exception. So the current statistics around this and the data problem came across quite a bit in different presentations. Also, the data and statistics are here difficult because of the informal nature of the work. But it is considered that there's about 60% of the global workforce working informally. And this is worldwide. And about 80% of enterprises are also informal enterprises. And many businesses and industries are actually exist within this, but particularly circularity here is an important consideration because in many parts of the world, waste management is also done through waste pickers, waste picker collectives, and organizations, traders that may also be operating in the informal economy. So it provides livelihoods to many people, and according to the Fair Circularity Initiative, about 19 to 24 million people globally earn their living through informal waste collection and recycling. So in summary, informal circular economy encompasses these efforts to reuse, recycle, repurpose materials, but outside the formal regulatory economic system that we often focus on, but rather more locally oriented, more indigenous practices, if you like, that emerge not necessarily through the initiatives that come from policymakers, but sometimes almost in their lack of. So why do we need to consider informal circularity, particularly in the Global South? Because as you can see here, informal employment isn't marginal in these contexts. Indeed, for example, nearly 90% of employment in sub-Saharan Africa is informal. And there are two approaches here that we can take. One is this enterprise-based approach. So we can consider, does the enterprise have a formal certificate, permit, license to operate in that context? And then there is another way to think about it, which is more about the labor. So does this person that is working in this sector employed formally, do they have a written contract? So formal means codified, written, contractual. So it's kind of, there's a legal boundary that defines it. So both approaches can coexist, but also sometimes formal enterprises can employ people informally as well. So that's an important thing that we must distinguish. So what does it mean on the ground? On the ground, it means there is precarious work. People do not necessarily have written contracts. They don't have health insurance. They don't have social security. And they may be working very long hours. But it's also quite complex. Other than this precarious nature, it can also sometimes provide autonomy and flexibility to people that are working informally as well. So also important to mention that some people may choose informal labor because of these benefits. And it's complex because it's often interwoven with family dynamics. So, for example, there may be an informal enterprise, and the entire enterprise may constitute the members of that family, cousins, broader family. Wife may be doing sorting for textile waste, husband may be going collecting waste, etc. So, and there are many intermediaries in the middle that make this network work. So it's a bit like a web. And while we may think we don't really know these actors, we may think it's hidden, but actually when we think of, you've learned a lot about circularity today. When we look at the material flows, of course, there is no informal material. Materials are indeed in the same value chain, so what we wear may as well be coming from informal waste collectors' efforts. So in essence, the materials are not hidden. Informality also reflects the gaps in state capacity, and often you also see these blurred lines between informality and illegality, particularly when there are corrupt practices as well alongside it. So it persists in the context of rapid urbanization, and also important to highlight lots of migration refugee dynamics. People often can't work in formal sectors, and that's why they enter into informal employment. Also important to highlight, though, is that it occurs in industries where there is a lot of competition based on price. So we must be mindful that when we demand low prices and tight deadlines, that also triggers informality. And it's a way then for producers to offer cheaper prices through cheap labor. I already mentioned the regulatory blind spots, and it's also interesting to highlight in contexts where there's a lot of informality. That means the cutting houses, the cutting rooms will also be informal. Lots of factories may be operating informally, and therefore for smaller micro enterprises to reach and collect textile waste from these types of organizations is easier because it's more relational. So that's how it emerges in real life. My research focused a lot on pre-consumer textile waste, so I'm aware that in the global north context, post-consumer textile waste is a very important consideration, but we must also understand the pre-consumer textile waste, given that 15% of fabric is lost on the cutting room floor. And these cutting room floors often are in global south context or textile producing countries. So I specifically looked at Turkey. My motivation for that was, well, first motivation, I'm Turkish originally, so I can speak the language, and it's my native language. But also Turkey plays an important role globally in the textile industry. So it's the 6th largest apparel supplier globally, and it's the 3rd largest clothing exporter to the EU. And the total employment is about 2 million. And what is very starking is that about 1 million of it is employed formally, 1 million employed or expected to be employed informally, including many migrant and refugee populations. And as I said earlier, tight deadlines and low-cost requirements initiate this kind of need for informal subcontracting. Indeed, you may be familiar with many brands. Many brands source from factories in Turkey. These factories are formal enterprises, but they work with a network of informal subcontractors. So that's what is important to understand, that there are many tiers in this supply chain. And what do we see in these places? Informal sweatshops are extremely long hours, poor and unsafe working conditions, and audit blind spots, because of course informal sweatshops are not often audited. So I came across all of this when I did field trip to a textile recycling cluster. This cluster is based on a city called Uşak. And it was a very interesting, eye-opening field trip where I did lots of interviews with recyclers. So this cluster emerged organically itself without necessarily policy support or incentive. Entrepreneurs there started up different businesses actually, and gradually moved into mechanical recycling. So that's what they do. They do a lot of mechanical recycling there, and you can see the production capacity on the slides. One of the things that they highlighted was their supply chain not being very stable, inconsistent supply, quality-related issues, but also what they constantly talked to me about was this kind of informal dynamics and accounting problems and tax-related challenges, and it was hard for me to understand. So I often asked them, so where are your suppliers based? And so I did this in phase 1 in 2021. And then after they told me, okay, you must really visit Istanbul because there are a lot of cutting room workshops there and there are lots of collectors, so you must go visit them. So in 2024, last year, I also visited these. So I will be sharing now how that looks like. So cutting rooms or cutting houses or factories, there's a lot of waste that is generated there. This gets collected either informally or formally. Of course, again, like I said earlier, it depends whether the cutting room is also informal or very small or micro. So sometimes there are formal enterprises if there is a large factory and they create a lot of waste. Sometimes these waste collectors collect large fabrics, so then these can go informally in the street markets. They can be recycled and reused. For example, children's clothing was one that they mentioned a lot. But if the smaller fabric cuts are generated that looks like that in the picture, then this goes to waste. The waste collectors then sort them by color and fabric type, material type, and then they give it to waste traders. So they sell it to waste traders. There are, we can call them waste traders or textile junk shops. And from there onwards, it goes to this textile recycling cluster. This textile recycling cluster in Uşak kind of constitute about 70 to 80% of textile recycling that is done in Turkey. So in essence, there are lots of bales that are being transported. It goes to shredders. Some shredding is done in micro enterprises, very, very small enterprises. In this cluster, there's also PET waste to recycled polyester production. And there are different polycotton mixes. In essence, the end products often look like socks, blankets, and rugs. You may be wearing socks that come from Uşak, who knows? And there's also non-woven production here, which goes to other industries. So about 35% of the regenerated yarn, they use the regenerated yarn as a term, is exported. So let's look at who does this. So just to highlight, I'm going to share some pictures, but these are AI-generated real-like pictures, but they are not real people. They are real, their stories are real, and what they said are real, but the pictures themselves are not real. So this is Emek in the picture that you see. He's been doing this business for a long time. He's from a city called Niide. He migrated to Istanbul years ago, and he learned that people from his village that migrated to the same neighborhood are doing this textile waste collection, so that's how he entered the business. And when I asked him, so how do you kind of see why does this informal economy emerge? He said if there are about 100 of collectors there, only 15 of them are actually registered, and unfortunately the state doesn't provide much support to them either. But he now owns, after years of experience, he now owns and has a license. He's got a recycling permit. But there is a major problem that they experience because a lot of their operations are within the city in residential areas. So that's his biggest problem. And in Turkish, we call it merdiven altı. So that literally means under the stairs. So that's the next picture. So this is what under the stairs look like. You can find in the streets as you walk along in Istanbul. You can see, and these are residential areas. So upstairs there's somebody working, somebody living. And downstairs there may be a textile waste warehouse. And then there is also these kinds of ingenious solutions like having a conveyor belt from the street so that you can throw a waste bale easily. There are people like Safiye. They are probably maybe the most hidden. So the collection can be done by people like Emek, but Safiye works inside. She is the person who is sorting the textile waste. And often she's not expecting to be retired at all. So what she does is a very dusty job. In fact, when I met Sophia, she told me to not join her do the sorting work. She said, "You will get very dusty, just move away." So here what we see is that there's also, in order for waste recycling to take place, we need to also consider women working in informal and semi-formal sorting jobs as well. And there's a lot of fatigue these people experience too. Now from sorting process, it goes to people like Semih. So Semih is an owner, manager, often second generation we see in these kinds of family businesses. And he's also talking to me a lot about this kind of informal nature. And the biggest problem is that he says 80% of these waste traders don't even use invoices. They don't have registration with the tax authorities. And it's not always by choice. So if there is no formal documentation from the factory, traders can't issue an invoice either. And this is not also to avoid tax, but it's just sometimes how the system works. On the morning that I visited this factory, or this, warehouse, there was a lot of tension, so there was a lot of anxiety. And when I tried to understand what was happening, they explained to me that that morning they had the police visiting them. And because they were employing some illegal migrants, so they have this tension between the authorities as well. As migrants and refugees work there, sometimes they get these visits. So basically what Semih does is to sort and to load. That's where the migrant and refugees work mostly, to load these heavy bales, and it gets transported for recyclers. And the recyclers are the ones that are then creating these products that are often exported and get into the clothes that or products that we use. And they face a lot of pressure in terms of certification, new legislations, and they are trying to understand all of this, but they actually find it confusing, and sometimes they are skeptical. So Ada also, again, in a family business, second generation, and she's asking some critical questions about the GRS here. So she says they ask for a GRS certificate, but you can't give a GRS certificate to a fabric. I can certify the yarn used in the fabric, so she's got some problems there. But also she thinks if global brands want truly transparency and traceability, that there needs to be the entire supply chain coverage. So based on what she's saying, the informal sector is not then covered in this chain. So in essence, then traceability, transparency becomes quite difficult. So what are some main takeaways? What can we learn? One of the things that I think we are seeing in these interviews is that the global certifications and standards, they impose certain rules, and the very small micro actors cannot always meet them, and there's little support for them. Informal systems actually drive circularity. So in the context of Turkey, this is a great service in terms of socio-ecological contributions of these people. But they are often marginalized, stigmatized. Waste sectors are largely stigmatized, unfortunately. And there is this kind of like also blurred line between what is formal, what is informal, because in essence, when it reaches the recyclers and it gets exported, the materials, then everything is formal. But the beginning, the very first years of this supply chain can be very informal. And also, when we are designing policies or any change, we must understand that these populations, because of the lack of the formal contractual arrangements, etc., they are very vulnerable to shocks. So if we decide a last-minute trade tariff, then it will affect these populations and how they work. And based on all of this, we need to think about how we can align formal and informal systems if we want to create a really, truly just and inclusive circular transition. And this needs to be grounded in local realities and co-designed with these informal actors as well. So we need to acknowledge that they exist. We need to make these standards work locally. There is quite a criminalized narrative about informal actors, so we must change this narrative. Where possible, we must identify opportunities for partnerships. There might be different governance models that Dilys was mentioning, co-creating systems together with these stakeholders. We must assess local impacts and think about informal sweatshops in these global value chains as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tulin, and you can stay here.
Hello, everybody. I'm Essi Karel, researcher at Aalto University, and today moderating this great Q&A session. I'm sure it's going to be great based on the questions that we have received from the audience. And during the next 30 minutes, or maybe we have a little bit more time, let's see. We try to cover as many of those questions as possible. So, and thank you for your great presentations already this morning. It's been very inspiring to listen to all of those. But since we don't have so much time to cover the questions, so let's get going. And I think we would like to start with Dilys. First, there was a question, how can we embrace the multi-species justice, avoiding to fall again in anthropocentrism? We sort of know in theory, but it is not easy to put it in practice.
Thank you. Great question. I know I've started a conversation about this in the break. So, I think that as designers and creatives that use our heads, hearts and hands, we have the opportunity to be able to vocalize some of our ideas through the channels that we don't usually use. So I talked a little bit in my presentation about the limitations of the English language and the cultures and practices of a Western approach to designing. What I'm finding is with the designers and the students that I'm working with, there's a move away from the traditional sources of inspiration, being looking at fashion imagery, looking at cultural imagery, music, films, etc., to actually spending more time in nature, in places where you can deeply listen and actually developing skills of deep listening, noticing, appreciating, and understanding the reciprocal process between ourselves and the more than human elements of our world. But it is really difficult. It's very different from the kinds of education that we are used to in Western art schools. So I would say that it's very tentative steps. We're very aware of the fact that we anthropomorphize nature and actually even the idea of the indigenous knowledges that we are drawing upon in itself is a sort of commodified kind of process. A lot of big businesses are talking about indigenous knowledges as a sort of othering. So I think we have to tread very, very carefully. But I think the things that we are learning are that there's a lot that isn't written down. There's a lot of tacit knowledge that exists, and we have to find ways to be able to learn with others. That's why we take a cooperative inquiry approach to everything we do. And situated practice. I mean, situated practice is not new for fashion designers, but I think that making sure that we spend time in places where the impacts of our work are felt is increasingly important. And in a very remote digital world where we're interacting online, I think I said it's particularly challenging. But we are working with an interdisciplinary approach. We're working with ecologists, biologists, ecofeminists, philosophers, etc. So I think that it expands the idea of what fashion designing is when we start to work in an interdisciplinary, place-based approach. But it's very tentative steps.
Yeah. Is there anybody who wants to kind of comment? Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, this is interesting topic and really not very easy. And I think that what Dilys is doing is really remarkable work, because you are also then inviting the companies to discuss about these really complicated issues. One thing actually well, this is more like philosophical track, and that is also probably coming from Johan Redström. You also mentioned him. Really complicated discussion is that what we actually want to sustain. So sustainability is quite loose if you think that, well, we are not defining that really precisely. So, and this kind of like a more value-based discussion that actually what we are aiming to sustain, is it more this kind of ecosystems, or is it still the Western way of living and consuming? So these are the hard questions that actually links to this aspect, that if you really think about that, what we should value and what we should keep, then we should have these kind of discussions also included, that what to sustain. And as much as there is this kind of learning, there should be also unlearning. I think that we should actually also discuss about this, that what we should forget.
Yeah, thank you. Still, maybe a little bit following up from that, I would like to ask: is there any specific? You mentioned knowledge, skills, and capabilities. Something new that we need in this whole transformation. Is there anything that you would like to really pinpoint?
Good question. I mean, I think Kirsi, actually, maybe drawing on what Kirsi just said, I think that there's an element of letting go of assumptions and perceptions of what it means to be a fashion designer, the things that we want to control. And I think as certainly as designers, there's I was trained to be able to control things, whether it's a material, whether it's how it fits, how it's worn, etc. And a kind of loosening and a letting go of that idea of control, and recognizing that there's a sort of a shared element of what creates a product, or what creates something that you can feel proud of. I think that what we are learning as academics is that the academic process encourages us to be individuals. You know, we are, I don't know about here, but certainly in the UK, we have what's called a research excellence framework, where we are accountable for the work that has our name on it. And that's how we get our star rating, et cetera, and that's how we get our funding. And actually, we are starting to really question that process, because everything is co-created, co-learned. So in the science disciplines, that's a normal procedure. So I referenced the work of Rockström and the many researchers that work together to create the ideas around planetary boundaries. So I think that this idea of the collective, whether it's from a research perspective, whether it's from a design perspective, and demonstrating that things are co-created, is something that feels really important. And I think it feels, and it questions then how we assess work, how we look at work. And that's not to say that everything is equally co-created, but that's, I think, part of the process of how do we recognize the different contributors to something, and how do we recognize the shared ownership of things. So I think that goes to the ideas of clothing and recycling, and this idea of ownership of things, but I think it also goes to the ideas around knowledge. So I think that we are questioning the academic process, the fashion process, and also the business process in that.
Mm. And the last one, you mentioned the business process, so we can move to the business model questions. But Minna, you had something you wanted to comment.
Yeah, I would actually like to comment on this a little bit, not only from the textile perspective, but in our research group on sustainability in business, there are some researchers from PhD students to an assistant professor level who are actually studying the post-human, the non-human perspectives in connection to organizing. And if I would just sort of say a couple of rules of thumb, they will probably hate me because I'm simplifying things, but making visible, like making nature visible, not only the processes that we create, but really sort of making visible trees, or making visible the growing organic materials in our speech, but actually plants and trees and so on. And then giving voice. And I don't know exactly how you give voice to the nature, but I think that Tulin's presentation of all of these that we now had in the morning was actually starting, giving the voice to something that usually doesn't have a voice. In that case, in your case, it's showing people that tend to be the ones that we don't pay attention to, but the same could be done, for instance, to animals, or it could be done to places in the nature, which we kind of take for granted, and at the same time don't hear, don't see that they are part of our existence.
Yeah. No further comments here. Then probably we let you continue, Minna, because considering those business models and what was in your presentation, you showed that figure regarding the business models for keeping garments longer in use. And there was a great question regarding this refuse step, which was really like the first one on the top. So this refuse step, it's absolutely crucial, but seems to exist outside the business logic somehow. Can you name any concrete steps that we can take today to make this sufficiency mode of governance possible in textiles and fashion, or consumption in general? Long question.
I think that actually maybe all of our presentations today have given us some steps. So I see that there are kind of two parts in that question. The first one is, can you name an example that makes refuse a business model? And as said, I haven't found it from the textile sector yet. There was once some finance professional came to me after a presentation, and he explained a relatively complicated business model from the finance side of how you can make people refuse from consuming. And I sort of, I listened to it and I understood it at that moment, but then it has escaped my mind. But indeed, I haven't found it from the textile sphere. What I could imagine, but this is really sort of simplistic thinking, is that some sort of, in a way, use your money for, I don't know, for protecting some nature area instead of buying a clothing, and then you could just get some sort of recognition, like, refusing to destroy nature brand that you could just sort of, put on your clothes, on your garment. But that's a bit sort of philanthropic, a little bit like carbon offsetting type of business model, which I'm not very fond of, let's put it in that way. But as said in my presentation, I think that already from this refuse and onwards, there are really, really ample possibilities. But we are so stuck with the current selling more, offering low price, small margins, and it's like a logic that we have to break in really many steps in order to get the totally possible business models on the market.
And maybe a little bit following from that, perhaps this is related to the previous question, but maybe everybody can here think, how would you answer this one? So how do we get to a future where sufficiency thinking is the baseline and we don't need to keep refusing from excess consumption? So if there is, maybe this is for all of you, if something comes to mind.
I really don't have an answer strictly to that, but I'm completely sure that it is not impossible, because we have moved quite a lot in the last, let's say, 50 years, when it used to be sufficiency-led. So now we have moved into this type of consuming on a different basis than what we used to be. So I'm not able to say how we initiate this thought going back, because some things have improved actually also. So maybe Kirsi.
Yeah, there is. My USA colleagues did quite interesting research experimentation a couple of years ago with the university students. So there was this fashion detox. So they were a group of students and they were not allowed to buy anything new stuff. And they were a group of students who normally go once a week to the shopping mall and bought something, cheap fashion items. So it was I don't remember, was it like a 3 months experimentation, but that actually was quite interesting because first they were keeping blog all the time that how they feel, what this experimentation meant for them. So first they were totally frustrated that they were actually really feeling like a depression that they were not allowed to buy anything new stuff. But after that, actually, they begin to look their own wardrobe and all the stuff that they already have and begin to be quite creative. So I think that, well, actually, creativity is one of those ways that we can actually struggle or we can fight against this kind of buying new stuff all the time. That actually, how about being a little bit more creative? And then actually the other one, what also comes from the research is that, well, depending on people's value base, that if you are a person who are valuing environment and taking these account, so actually they are able then to be a little bit more reasonable. They can say to us that I can't buy because actually this is effect to the environment. So I think that should start from the early age of children. So we should probably include this to this school education, that this kind of value base, and then providing also inspiring examples how we can actually be much more creative in the while consuming fashion.
Yeah, maybe just kind of in support of what Kirsi just said, I thought those invoices when we stepped in, they were very creative, and there in tax it was written, I think, care. So maybe we need to also think about, caring for what we have and reconnecting with materials in different way, a bit like the presentation that you had, Dilys, the matters mattering. And I think that's probably a first step for us to kind of rethink the culture and matters mattering.
Yeah, I also think that this value base is very important, but unfortunately I think that sometimes there is also this value action gap, that even though myself, I think I have sustainable values, but still I have the tendency to buy something new sometimes, so I don't always put these values into reality and into action, so somehow we need still tools to overcome this value action gap.
And Minna probably had something still.
Yes, I don't want to be sounding cynical. I'm actually saying this with a positive vibe, that the natural resources are becoming lesser and lesser, and over the coming years their prices will be becoming higher and higher. So it actually means that we won't have like the possibilities of always consuming like what has been now going on for 2 or 3 decades. So in that sense, I think the limit will come. And I also think that this is, of course, a very Western and even Western above certain standard level discussion, because there are already a lot of people in the world who can only live at the sufficiency levels, and that's it. So I just wanted to bring this perspective to the discussion, but I think that the more I actually liked Kirsi's creativity point, that you go to your own wardrobe, because I've just had this struggle within me. We have a 25-year-old sofa. It has been kind of redone once in terms of the textiles, but now it either would have had to go, but it's still in such a good shape, the structure of it, that I couldn't, and first I was really like, still not a new sofa, always the same sofa. But then, when I went into the store where the fabrics are, and we started kind of ideating around the fabrics for the sofa and the cushions and so on, it became such a fun activity that I realized that eventually I actually had so much more choice with all that, the fabrics and the creativity of my own. So now I've kind of given up, and I think that the sofa will stay with us as long as I'm gonna exist on the earth. But it's a very good feeling.
And just to add to that, I think Yeah, maybe two things. One is around, our cultural practices and almost kind of reminding ourselves that we can be creative and that we don't need to go to something new always. I was reminded the other day, I was with somebody who was looking, I can't remember the name of it, but the Japanese cloth that is used traditionally to tie presents up with and present presents, and also is a headscarf, etc., etc. And she was saying how even in Japan that people are using these less and less. It's almost as if they feel too nervous to be creative, and they've forgotten how to do things unless it's presented to them as something that's already finished. So kind of changing our cultural practices and remembering that we are all creative, whether we've had a creative education or not, and that we can experiment, we can try things. But the other thing to say is drawing on the work that Kirsi and others did around the Sufficiency wardrobe, and what you were just saying, Minna, that actually there's many people around the world who live within the 1.5 degree carbon footprint for their fashion consumption, and there's a few countries that are living way beyond it. So when we're talking about sufficiency, we are talking about some people in the world, not other people in the world. And so the lifestyle choices of parts of the world versus other parts of the world becomes a very stark reality of the issue is our lifestyles, and that is what is preventing us from having a sufficiency wardrobe. So thinking differently about those lifestyles, and questioning actually what elements of those lifestyles we really do enjoy and need and want, and how much is enough. That question that maybe we all of us can ask ourselves if we are living in one of those countries. And I'm certainly in one of those countries right at the top of that list of living beyond our carrying capacity. So yeah, just to remember that it's not everywhere that needs to change or think about lifestyle choices, but there's some places that particularly need to.
Yeah. Thank you. I think we also need to involve Michael in this conversation somehow.
I'm enjoying the discussion here.
There were actually many questions now considering textile recycling and especially the scalability related topic. So how do you see the commercial challenges of the chemical recyclers? Can they pass them, and what would it require? We're jumping a little bit to a new topic.
Yeah, what we see now, these few companies that are there, they're really the tip of the spear. And so whenever anything happens in the market, they are taking the biggest blow. So the market goes down, people are hesitating and investing into new technologies, and the whole sector is going down. So there are a lot of things that are not really in control of these companies, and they're struggling with, even though maybe their approach and their technology is sound. But this is what we see now, especially 2024 was a really bad year for this. And like I tried to highlight, the sector has to evolve in parallel. We cannot develop one technology and it doesn't fit back or front end into these steel textile chain. And maybe some of you have seen that all those who are producing now recycled fibers, they barely have 100%. They feed in a small amount. And that might sound like maybe greenwashing or cheating, but actually, if you look at it, it's the only way to move gradually into this. You cannot change the system overnight, but by feeding in a new product that behaves just like the old one, but is a little bit more sustainable, we have it non-disruptive, this transformation. So we need time. This is a change that will not happen overnight, and we need to keep pushing and be positive about it.
Let's say there was also related to the recycling. I remember seeing one question also to Susanna. Let's see. Do you have an idea how do recycled fibers actually compare to virgin bio-based fibers in terms of LCA impacts and benefits, given that they are made of existing used raw materials?
That's a good question. Actually, because what I mentioned in my presentation, this bio-based difficulty of including also the land use impacts. It's a very immature and heavily discussed issue how we include and what the carbon sink of bio-based materials is. How long do we follow the carbon sink to be collected, so to say, until when we collect it to use. So this is like a temporal question, actually, that if we use wood, how long do we follow the forest for? Is it for 100 years? Is it for 50 years until it sort of collects this carbon sink? But as a short question, I don't remember what the issue, if there was, if it's calculated now, I don't know. Do you?
Yeah, I can give you an example from other project, not from Phoenix, but last year the New Cotton project ended. It was funded by European Union, and Infinite Fiber Company led the research. But it was 3 years project, and actually the RISE, the Research Institute of Sweden, actually made this life cycle analysis about this textile waste, recycled textile waste, made yarn for this Infinite Fiber Company technology, or then compared to virgin cotton. And it's, well, you have to include the virgin cotton impact to the textile waste recycling, so that's the problem in here. But then actually they said that, well, yes, there are improvements in environmental impacts, but actually it was the end result a little bit surprised us, because actually linking to the energy used in Finland. So if they are able to change that for green energy totally, then they could make the biggest environmental improvements. So it was the electricity there which actually made it not so nice end result.
Yeah. And maybe continuing a little bit with this LCA topic, and also linking that to the use phase as well, and the importance of consumers and consumption. So since the use phase has a big impact on the environmental footprint, is there a way to increase transparency of what happens in the use phase of the garment? And I think kind of similar question was posed both to Kirsi as well as to Susanna. So do you want to?
Yeah, it's a tricky question because actually the data from the use phase is something that everyone is eager to get. But of course it's quite personal data, it's not easy to collect and easy to share, so that is a problematic. So, but for example now when this linked to this new EU regulations, and one of those topics will be this kind of like a lifetime of the garment, and probably that only linked to this technical lifetime aspect. And then now last autumn I took part for this online session that EU policymakers are organizing linked to this textile regulations, and they were asking that from the audience that who knows, who has the data from this use phase, because now they are trying to make this lifetime, technical lifetime estimation according to different product categories. Of course, some companies have, for example, the workwear companies who are mainly leasing the garments, so they have exact that knowledge, that they know exactly how long these garments will last, how many washing times they will last. And then I think that Swedish company, this Filippa K, actually they started the experimentation a couple of years ago, that they were asking their consumers to provide this data for them. But I think it's not very clear. Yeah.
Yeah, I can continue. I think the big question is this technical versus emotional lifetime, because we also tend to keep our garments in even though maybe my pants are a little bit too small, I kept them now, but I have had them in the closet in storage for, let's say, 8 years. So we have this huge storage also of the garments. So actually what we want to know is how many times they are worn, not how many years they are kept in the storage. But we have now tried, I think maybe there are ways through the EPR system, there are like these attempts to detect when the garment is brought to disposal, technically how many times it has been washed, because it wears down a little bit. That is a very heavy way to detect it. We did also ask consumers in a survey type questionnaire with our partner Heureka. And it's a really versatile question, and it really depends on what the garment type is. So if we have, let's say, underwear or T-shirt, the use time is much, much more. But if we have this kind of, what is it called, juhlavaateis? Festive dresses, so we wear them maybe, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 times. So we have to have quite a detailed look at different garments and how many times they are worn, and then what we can do to attempt to increase the wear times. And maybe also as an additional note, I'm sorry I'm speaking so long, but it's not necessary, I mean the optimal situation might be that one consumer buys the garment, uses it for the entire technical life cycle, and then disposes when it's completely broken and worn. It might not be necessary that we are changing all the time the garments between each other, because that causes a little bit more. But in certain, like these festive dresses, there is just not enough celebrations in my lifetime that I could be. Then I need to start switching it. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I'm having a look at the time. So Tulin, let's touch upon your expertise next. There was a great question from the audience. What could a clothing brand from Global North do in practice to improve the worker rights of informal workers from Global South?
Okay, so that's a very big question. I think there are many things, but of course they usually work directly with, so there are buyers. The buyers usually work directly with, a production site. And beyond that production site, there's not so much visibility of for example, the informal sector. So I think one thing that could be done is actually engaging with the direct suppliers that they have, and having more meaningful, open conversations with them, and not having it so top down, but just acknowledging that this exists and that, I think we are aware of it. I think there's a lot of stigma, as I say. When you say this informal economy, it comes with stigma, for example. In fact, there was another Turkish friend here just at the break, and she told me, don't make it sound so bad. It's not bad. It's a way of living. It's a way of earning a living. And yes, there are some gray boundaries. And so we must be able to openly talk about it. And then it makes sense then here the brands have that conversation. But also when there are policies, practices, it may even be just in terms of how we make this supply chain relationship work, then we must also ensure it's trust-based but supported. So in essence, the burdens may be very hard for the producers there. And they already, work extremely long hours, tight deadlines, a lot of competition from China, ultra-fast fashion. And so in order for them to be able to, transition, not just in a circular way, not just implementing recycled content, but also ensuring that this happens all inclusively in a just way, where informal sectors are also included in this change. So I think that needs to be a dialogue, and it needs to be a dialogue. Sorry, I'm talking too much, but it needs to be a dialogue that also considers the local actors and their representation, whether it be the Chamber of Commerce, whether it be the local NGOs that work closely with them, whether it be certain cooperatives, whatever, form, and actually, approaching this as an equal to equal partner in support of each other if we want this to be just and fair.
Yeah, thank you. I think we have still room for one question which could be directed to all of you for the final last round before having the lunch. So each one of you from your own expertise or from your own perspective, what do you think? Who should take the lead on the systemic change? Minna will take the lead.
I can start. So honestly, usually the systems change will happen fastest if the party who has the most power and resources takes the lead. So it should be the brands, of course. Will it be, in reality, the brands? Perhaps not. So that is when we kind of come back to the starting point of Phoenix, which is like, how could we initiate changes in all parts of the system by those who are able to do it in some ways. But if I were kind of a system god, I would go to the brands and say that, hey, you have the money and you have the power.
Yes, I'm happy to go next. And I would say that the great thing is that there's no one lead, just as there's no one in charge. And just as I totally understand what you're saying about those that do have a lot of power and also have quite big margins, et cetera, and have a great disparity of wealth, are in a very good position to be able to make change. However, I do think, and maybe it's because also I work with a lot of students and a lot of young designers, that going back to the refuse element, if everybody decided actually that they would refuse to buy as much, that in itself is a massive disruption to the system. And those that are pushing sales and using a model of inbuilt obsolescence, that model falls apart. So I think there's bottom up, there's top down, there's middle out. I don't think there's one place. I think there's many places, and that means that each of us has an opportunity and a responsibility, no matter what our roles are.
Yeah.
Yes, perhaps I can continue from here. I think that we need all the stakeholders. Of course, we have some kind of role in here. And then what Dilys was saying, that we can all refuse. But I think that actually change is already happening from consumers' point of view, because now we see that actually the second-hand fashion is really like growing all the time. And we can make actions when we are repairing something, that actually we extend the use time of the garments, or we are taking part for swapping events, or we are selling our garments in the second-hand business. I think that actually consumers begin to be much more active. They already have a role in the fashion business, which previously they were totally passive. We were just buying, but actually now we can make also these kind of actions. And I think that that's really important. But I also totally agree with Minna, because we still have big fashion brands and they are making really good profit. They have power and they have money. They can make the change actually. But I think that policy needs to be like kick them, so that actually this change will start, because everyone is now looking, for example, these EU regulations, that what actually is coming there and how strong effect that those regulations have in their business. So they are a little bit like everyone is like waiting right now. So I think that somebody has to kick them and to push the development onwards.
And briefly, we have 4 minutes time before the lunch time, so let's try to be quick.
I was just about to give a longer. Normally I would have said regulators, but now I've learned that regulator putting into policy, it's quite a slow. In democracy we are very slow. Maybe Trump could do this quicker, but we are not there. But I will answer a little bit out of the box kind of thing, and I would say that also maybe sort of social media, something happening there, because it has a huge power nowadays on consumers. This what is being said in social media. So maybe putting it there, gamifying this sufficiency issue or something like that. That's a little bit out of the box.
Yeah, thanks.
I mean, we're all listing different actors, so I think everybody is a part of it. Maybe an actor we haven't talked about, grassroots organizations, more place-based NGOs. They're also, interacting, engaging with different people. So civil society, third sector, for example, in the UK, a lot of the textile waste is actually through charity shops and the third sector. So I guess also they must also be involved in this change. So I think we're all co-leading it and co-creating a new system.
Yeah, maybe my point on this is that we don't need a textile revolution, we need a textile reformation, and that takes time. It's nothing that goes overnight. And while I fully agree that regulation can catalyze this reformation, I'm not sure if that's the only thing that can really push it. If we would think about, there would be now a dictator coming in here and that would say we can buy that amount of textiles every year and that is it, we would do it. But then as soon as that dictator would be gone, I think it would take less than a year and we would be back to our old habits and to our old fashion. So it has to be really a systemic change that takes all of us and where we maybe contribute what we can contribute from the academic side, from the industry side, and from the consumer side.
Yeah. I think that's a great end for this discussion. So, hey, thanks a lot for all the speakers.